Daniel Sports Central beginning you guys my Week 14 college football bowl projections for the 2022 season. We have finally made it through the entire regular season, and as we look forward to the conference championships this weekend, I'll be giving you guys my final edition of bowl projections here today. So that said, let's get started with our Group of 5 bowl games, starting out with the Bahamas Bowl. We got UAB and Miami, Ohio. This game has been confirmed as of right now. We do have, I think, two matchups, two bowls that have been confirmed to this current point. The Bahamas Bowl is one of them, with UAB and Miami, Ohio. Cure Bowl, we got Toledo and Marshall. Fenway Bowl, we got Syracuse and East Carolina. Syracuse lands in the Fenway Bowl, and that was a team that started out the season 6-0. They were ranked 14th, I think, in the nation at one time. So, yeah, for Syracuse, they kind of fell apart down the stretch, but at 7-5, they still get to the Fenway Bowl to take on East Carolina. New Mexico Bowl, we got Air Force and North Texas. LA Bowl, we got Boise State and Washington State. Washington State's been projected in this bowl game pretty much for, 5-6 weeks straight now. It's made total sense because you got the top 6 in the Pac-12 between UCLA and Oregon State, Oregon, Utah, etc. And then you got Washington State right in the middle. And then below them, you got Arizona, Cal, Arizona State, etc. that are at least a couple of games behind Washington State. So it's made perfect sense for the Cougars to be in the LA Bowl, and that's what more than likely will happen. And I've got them taking on Boise State right now, so that'd be a great matchup. Boise State's had a great finish to the season. They're definitely one of the hottest teams in the Mountain West. In the Lending Tree Bowl, we got UNLV and Southern Miss. Las Vegas Bowl, we got UCLA and Missouri. Missouri made it to a bowl game. That was a team that only a few weeks ago looked like they were going to make it. They had a tough November, that's for sure, of matchups, but Missouri was able to win enough, and they got up to 6 wins. They're taking on UCLA, who is 9-3, so that's a 9-3 versus a 6-6 team, but UCLA is best fit for the position because Oregon State's had a strong finish, and they obviously just beat Oregon, so you got the Beavers who are up there, and there's 4 9-win teams in the Pac-12 as of right now, and I've got UCLA pretty much as the last 9-win team, and so I got them in the Las Vegas Bowl. Frisco Bowl, we got Fresno State and Troy. Myrtle Beach Bowl, we got South Alabama and UTSA. Idaho Potato Bowl, Bowling Green and Utah State. Boca Raton Bowl, Houston and Wyoming. And then the New Orleans Bowl, we got Western Kentucky and Louisiana. Moving on, we got the Armed Forces Bowl, SMU and Rice. Independence Bowl, UCF and Coastal Carolina. We got Coastal Carolina flexing in to this bowl game because Army did not make a bowl game this season. Gasparilla Bowl, we got Wake Forest and Buffalo. Wake Forest, the Demon Deacons, kind of a disappointing season for them, getting only up to 7 wins, but you still get to a halfway decent bowl game to take on a talented Buffalo team. Hawaii Bowl has also been confirmed. This is the only other bowl game that has been confirmed to this point. It is on Christmas Eve, San Diego State and Middle Tennessee State. Quick Lane Bowl, we got UConn and Eastern Michigan. UConn flexing in for a Big Ten team. And yes, the Huskies of UConn are in a bowl game this season. They are bowl eligible. They got up to 6 wins. And yeah, I mean, that's definitely improvement based on how they've been the past few years. They've been probably the worst team in the FBS the past few years. So for UConn, that is, you could say, a big deal. And the Big Ten, I've got 9 Big Ten teams making bowl games. And 5 of those teams are going to be in major bowl games. So that does leave the Quick Lane Bowl open for a team, and I've got UConn filling that position. Camellia Bowl, we got Liberty and Georgia Southern. First Responder Bowl, Kansas and BYU. We got the Jayhawks going into the First Responder Bowl. They're a 6-win team. It's been a great season for Kansas, and once again, in comparison to years past, they're kind of in a similar boat as to UConn, even though for Kansas, starting out the season 5-0, they finished out the season 1-6, but still a good season for Kansas and definitely something to build on. I've got them taking on BYU, which the Cougars of BYU have had a bit of a disappointing season in comparison to some expectations, but they're still a really talented team, so that'd be a great matchup there for both teams. Birmingham Bowl, we got Arkansas and Memphis. We have the Razorbacks, a 6-6 team playing off against Memphis in the Birmingham Bowl. Guaranteed Rate Bowl, we got Oklahoma and Wisconsin, 2 teams that have, you maybe could say, underachieved this season. You got the Sooners, who only finished out at 6 wins this season, which is the worst in a while for the Sooners. They're usually a big national contender and competing for New Year's 6 games, but in the end, Oklahoma is only going to be in the Guaranteed Rate Bowl this season to take on Wisconsin. The Badgers finished out at 6 wins as well in the Big Ten. Both teams, disappointing seasons, but usually are towards the top of their conferences. Still can make for a great matchup. Military Bowl, we got Louisville and UCF. The Cardinals get into the Military Bowl. And Louisville, they finished out with 7 wins, so not a terrible season for them. I got them taking on UCF. Liberty Bowl, we got Baylor and Florida. The Bears also been a bit of disappointment this season. They finished out at 6 wins. Then they're going to take on Florida, who also finished out at 6 wins. So both teams kind of a similar game and similar situation to that Oklahoma-Wisconsin matchup. You got 2 teams that kind of underachieved this season. The Holiday Bowl, we got Florida State and Oregon. This would be a great matchup if it were to happen. Oregon 9-3, Florida State. They also finished out at 9-3, a great season for Florida State. Oregon, kind of a disappointing November. But that's a rematch of that one college football playoff game. I forget what year it was. It was 2014 or 15. I think it was the 2014 season. It was the first season of the college football playoff, and that was a semifinal game in the Rose Bowl. So that'd be an interesting rematch there between Florida State and Oregon. Both teams have not played each other since then. Moving on to Texas Bowl, we got Texas Tech and Ole Miss. This would be a great matchup here. Red Raiders have had actually a pretty good season in comparison to how they've been in years past in recent history, and they finished out at 7-5. They're taking on Ole Miss, who is 8-4. Pinstripe Bowl, we got Duke and Maryland. I mean, Duke's also a team that's been a bit of a surprise team. Honestly, we've seen a ton of surprise teams this season. Duke is definitely one of them. And the future, you could say, is bright for Duke. That's a young team, and they got up to 8 wins this season in the ACC. And I've got them taking on Maryland, who finished out at 7-5 in the Big Ten. And that's also a former, when Maryland was back in the ACC, that was a matchup that we used to see. Cheez-It Bowl, we got Pitt and Oklahoma State. Pitt finished out at 8 wins this season. Not a bad season for them. I got them taking on Oklahoma State, who kind of fell apart down the stretch. They finished out at 7-5, so we'll see if they can rebound and get a solid win against Pitt. Alamo Bowl, we got Texas and Utah. Texas, the Longhorns, finished out at 8 wins this season. Not a bad season for them. Maybe a little bit disappointing, but 8 wins isn't bad. And I got them taking on Utah, who I do have losing the Pac-12 title game this weekend, this Friday. I've got USC winning that game and proceeding on to the college football playoffs. So Utah finishes out at 9-4 for me at least, and that would be a great matchup. Texas and Utah, I'd say it's a pretty even matchup there. Duke's Mayo Bowl, we got Minnesota and North Carolina. The Golden Gophers finished out at 8-4 in the Big Ten this season, and I got them taking on North Carolina, who I've got as the ACC runner-up. I do have them losing to Clemson this weekend, so they'll finish out at 9-4 on the season. Sun Bowl, we got NC State and Oregon State. NC State finished out the season at 8-4. I got them taking on an Oregon State team that is hot right now. They finished out the season 9-3 and had a huge comeback win against Oregon last week. So a lot of really interesting teams, that's for sure, out of the Pac-12 this season. I mean, if you look at Washington, we'll get into them in a second, but that's also a team that's really come around down the stretch. And then we got the Gator Bowl, which is Notre Dame and Kentucky. Notre Dame flexing in for a Big Ten team there. Not a bad season for the Fighting Irish. They've improved dramatically over the course of the season. I've got them taking on Kentucky, who finished out at 7 wins this season. Arizona Bowl, we got San Jose State and Ohio. And the Music City Bowl, we got Iowa and Mississippi State. The Hawkeyes finished out at 7-5 this season. I've got them taking on Mississippi State, who finished out at 8 wins in the SEC. Now, moving on to some more higher-end bowl games, we got the Citrus Bowl, Purdue and LSU. The Boilermakers, I got finishing out as the runner-up in the Big Ten, even though there's definitely 2 better teams than Purdue that did not make the Big Ten championship. And obviously those teams are Ohio State and Penn State. But Big Ten West, definitely a terrible division this season, that's for sure. And Purdue just so happened to come out on top. But honestly, if there's any team in the Big Ten West that can beat Michigan, it is Purdue, because the Boilermakers have proven in years past they can compete with the best of teams, and they play up to their competition. And this team, from experience of last season, they've got plenty of experience from last season, and obviously that was the year, last year, when they knocked off multiple teams ranked number 2. And guess what? Michigan is ranked. They're ranked number 2 for this weekend. So I'm not saying Purdue's going to win. In fact, I think Michigan's going to win by potentially a couple of touchdowns. But I do have Purdue landing in the Citrus Bowl to take on LSU, who finished out at 10-2. I've got them losing this weekend to Georgia. So you got the 2 runner-ups of the SEC and the Big Ten in the Citrus Bowl here. Relia Quest Bowl, we got Illinois and South Carolina. Now, we could have an ACC team, potentially North Carolina, in the Relia Quest Bowl to take on South Carolina. That could be an interesting matchup. But I do have Illinois going into this position. I think the Fighting Illini would make for a better matchup. North Carolina's just they've lost 2 straight heading into the ACC title game. I've got them losing that ACC title game, so they'll go to 9-4. And with 3 straight losses, I do think they get put in a different bowl game, and that flexes Illinois in to take on South Carolina, who's really been great down the stretch. The Gamecocks finished out at 8-4 this season, and obviously their last 2 wins were over Tennessee and Clemson, 2 of the top teams in the nation. So this would make for a great matchup here. Now for your New Year's 6 games, we got Clemson and Alabama. This is a familiar matchup. In the Orange Bowl, we got Clemson, who finished out at 10-2 this season. I've got them finishing out at 11-2, winning the ACC championship game, and that puts them against Alabama, who kind of had a disappointing season considering some of the expectations. And honestly, both teams kind of disappointed, you could say. Both teams had very high expectations heading into the season, and so I've got this matchup happening in the Orange Bowl, and I think it'd be a great rematch. Obviously, this is a game that we've seen many times in the college football playoff in years past, so this would be, I think, a pretty convenient matchup for the committee to put together here. You got the ACC champion, who is Clemson, in the Orange Bowl, to take on one of the best teams in the SEC, that is Alabama. Moving on to the Sugar Bowl, we got Tennessee and Kansas State. Now, for the Orange Bowl, I could see Tennessee getting into that game and Alabama being in this game. That is a possibility, but I do think the committee ends up putting Alabama against Clemson. It would make perfect sense given those two teams' histories, especially in the past few years. So I got Tennessee taking on Kansas State, who I've actually got predicted to be the Big 12 champion. I've got Kansas State winning this weekend against TCU. Do not sleep on the Wildcats. That is a good football team. And I think TCU still gets into the college football playoff, but I've got Kansas State winning the Big 12, and that puts them in the Sugar Bowl to take on Tennessee, the Vols. Moving on to the Rose Bowl, we got Ohio State and Washington. The Buckeyes, I've got projected to make the Rose Bowl at 11-1 on the season. But honestly, the Rose Bowl is probably the most unpredictable bowl matchup to this current point. I mean, you got 5 different teams that could be in this game. You got Ohio State or Penn State, and then you've got either USC, Washington, or Utah, and that all depends on how the Pac-12 shakes out. And I've got Ohio State and Washington being the matchup in the end. I think Ohio State gets selected over Penn State unless Utah gets placed in this game. Now, if Utah gets placed in this game, if they're the Pac-12 champion and the committee wants to put Utah on this, then Penn State would be in this matchup instead of Ohio State, I think, just because we did see Ohio State face off against Utah in the Rose Bowl last year. So that's the one scenario that Penn State gets into this game. But then again, even if Utah does win the Pac-12 championship, there is a possibility that USC gets placed in this game just because the record is so much better than Utah's is. They've got 2 more wins than Utah does, which is a big difference. But in the end, I do have USC winning this weekend against Utah. That puts USC in the college football playoff. That could put Utah potentially still in the Rose Bowl. But I think Washington, with the better record than Utah at 10-2, gets placed into the Rose Bowl, and that would allow Ohio State to be in this game to take on the Huskies. But this is definitely the most interesting matchup and the most unpredictable New Year's 6 game, I'd say, at this current point. And then the Cotton Bowl, we got Penn State. So basically the alternate between who doesn't get in the Rose Bowl between Ohio State and Penn State will be in the Cotton Bowl to take on Tulane, who I've got projected as the New Year's 6 team into, or a group of 5 team into a New Year's 6 bowl game. And Tulane's had a great season. This would still be a great matchup, that's for sure. And so that said, moving on to your college football playoff semifinals, we got Georgia and TCU in the Peach Bowl. And I think if Georgia and Michigan both win this weekend, which I do project to happen, I honestly can't imagine that Michigan would jump Georgia unless there's a huge blowout with Michigan. But I do have Georgia finishing out at number 1 to take on TCU, and then Michigan I've got at number 2 to take on USU's number 3. Once again, I've got Kansas State beating TCU this weekend, which could potentially drop them. There's also a chance that TCU stays at number 3, even if they do lose in the Big 12 championship game. I actually have got Kansas State beating TCU by a couple of touchdowns. I do think TCU maybe doesn't have the best game. I think it's a tough matchup, and Kansas State is a pretty hot team right now. So I do think Kansas State potentially beats TCU by a couple of touchdowns. That would still keep the Horned Frogs in the top 4 unless there's a massive blowout. Otherwise, then we might see Ohio State go in for TCU. But in this situation, I've got USC jumping up to number 3 as they avenge their one loss of the season, which is Utah, and that puts them against Michigan. This would still be a great matchup, and quite honestly, 3 and 4 don't even make much of a difference because Georgia and Michigan are actually pretty similar teams. They're both really strong defensively. Offensively, both teams are great as well, but defensively is really where both teams shine. So in the end, that's going to wrap it up for my bowl projections. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on these projections, and I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.